In the early morning hours of January 29, 2022, a chilling discovery shattered the quiet of Canton, Massachusetts. Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found lifeless outside a colleague's home, his body frozen in a winter storm. The initial shock deepened as investigators turned their focus to his girlfriend, Karen Reed. Prosecutors allege that after a night of drinking, Reed had purposely struck O'Keefe with her SUV, leaving him to succumb to the elements. They charged her with murder. Reed's defense painted a much different picture. They suggested a sinister cover-up implicating fellow officers in a plot to conceal the true circumstances of O'Keefe's death. The courtroom became a battleground of narratives, each side presenting conflicting evidence and theories. Outside the courthouse and on social media, another battleground which divided the community. The trial's intensity culminated in a deadlocked jury, leading to a mistrial that only deepened this case's intrigue. As the retrial approaches on April 1st, the stakes have never been higher. Both sides were back in court today as the judge heard critical arguments that can severely impact the outcome of this case. Tonight, we'll bring in our trial insiders and take a look at all the latest in the Karen Reed murder trial. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. And there's only one way to describe what's going to happen on April 1st, and that is the retrial of the century. And it's rare that I put those terms together, you know, retrial and like making it something monumental and big, because many times a retrial is anticlimactic. Not in this case. This one is different. The intensity has heightened. Both sides are going at it even harder. The divide in the community is even more stark. You've got a sea of pink support outside the courthouse for Karen Reed. And you had that in the beginning. They're going to be there again. The numbers may be even greater this time around. But something else is happening. You've got, at the end of the last trial, some folks starting to show up wearing blue, which puts someone like me in a real tough spot. Okay? I can't wear my pink ties. I can't wear my blue ties. So for this trial, I've got to wear purple every night. Every night. Otherwise, someone's going to say, aha, I know what he's thinking. I know who he's cheering for here. I'm looking for the truth. That's all. I'm going to be staying in purple throughout this trial. Unbelievable. But that's the way it is. It's very personal. It's extremely personal. Say something on, go ahead, post something on social media against one side or the other. See what happens to you. Now, that's the battle outside the courthouse. That's the battle on social media. The battle will be won inside the courtroom. And, you know, right now there's the legal battle that's taking place. And the legal battle is the one before the trial, where both sides are trying to limit each other's evidence, making accusations against one another, and Judge Cannoni has to make rulings. That's the legal battle. But the most important battle will be when the trial actually begins and the jury gets to hear the evidence. And we will ask the question, will the jury speak in this case? They didn't last time. It was deadlocked. I know there's controversy surrounding that deadlock, a lot of controversy. But the jury needs to speak. We need to get a verdict. We need to change this purple tie to a red tie and let John O'Keefe's family hear the truth. Either Karen Reed did it or Karen Reed did not do it. But 12 people have to agree. 12 people have to agree. So as the buildup to this case, which is just around the corner, April 1st, jury selection, folks, there's a lot of other things happening that make this the retrial of the century, which is the added intensity of coverage. We've been doing it from the beginning, right? Like, you go back years here on Court TV and Closing Arguments, but in other places, including a documentary that just came out that's covering this case, has sort of an inside look at some of the information. Well, guess what? In court today, they were talking about the documentary that was on TV. This is unreal. Like apparently, According to prosecutors, they believe like some new evidence has been uncovered. Take a listen.
The issue regarding glass, I expect, is going to be a issue in the next case, and I say that because we learned last night, for the first time on a public airing of an episode, that the defendant suggests that Mr. O'Keefe took her vodka soda glass out of her car. Now, that is the first time we've had any statements from Ms. Reed suggesting that, and also there was another statement regarding a claim that Ms. Reed pulled glass from John O'Keefe's face. Never heard that before. So we have this evolving or new testimony, or statement rather, statements about glass. And so I think first, I'd like to consider this new information that we just learned last night.
This is big news, right? If you're the prosecutor and you've got the defendant talking on television, talking about the glass, and then some statements made about Karen Reed removing glass from the nose of John O'Keefe. What is going on here? What is the impact of this? What does this tell us? Does this paint a different picture? Who does this help? Well, to figure it all out, I'm going to need some help. Let's bring in our Karen Reed trial insiders. Joining us tonight, trial attorney Wayne Dennison, criminal defense attorney Joseph Krowski Jr., Karen Reed supporter and nurse Kim on YouTube and TikTok. Kim Whalen is with us, and the creator behind the Yellow Cottage Tales YouTube channel, Kevin Lenahan. Great to have everyone here. Wayne Dennison, is this a problem? What is, all of a sudden now we're talking about the cocktail glass? We're talking about Karen Reed pulling glass from the victim John O'Keefe's nose?
Yeah, it is a problem, and it's a problem that is actually self-inflicted. This is a defendant, unlike any other defendant I have ever seen, who decides to talk over and over again. She gives interviews to Vanity Fair. She participates in a documentary. Everything that comes out of her mouth is an admission that can be used against her in court, and this is likely to be a problem.
Kim, were you surprised?
Yeah, it was surprising, Vinny. Thank you for having me on tonight. And I hadn't heard that previously, but I will say that, in my opinion, having the story of a debris being moved from Officer John O'Keefe's face had been reported previously in Karen's, any interview she had done. And I think that it's more consistent or concerning for the Commonwealth's case when you're still having active bleeding, which was described by her, if somebody had been in the snow for 6 hours at 18 degrees, that's not really consistent in my medical opinion.
Kevin, is this the first time you're hearing anything about a piece of glass being removed from John O'Keefe's nose?
Yeah, absolutely. In a previous life, for many years, I was a bar owner, a bar manager, bartender, been in the middle of way too many fights, had bottles thrown at me, seen glass everywhere, and I have never seen a fight that ended up with a broken piece of glass inside somebody's face. So this is a really strange story for Karen to tell, because it's hard to imagine how John could be in a fight inside the house and end up with a piece of glass inside his face. But it's not hard to imagine how when he's struck by a 6,000-pound vehicle at 24 miles an hour, that strikes, his hand is holding the glass and it hits the front panel and it shatters and glass pieces fly everywhere and a shard sticks in his face. So, I don't know if the story is true, but I'm really interested as to why she actually chose to tell that story.
Joseph Krowski Jr., how does this play in the retrial, this little factoid?
Look, defendants have a monumental constitutional right to remain silent prior to trial and during trial. The jury can't even consider that. I just can't appreciate what the strategy is, putting the defendant out there time after time after time. If she wants to get her story out there, hold back, say less, testify at trial. she has essentially gifted the prosecution all kinds of information. And the biggest problem is the information contradicts itself, and it just doesn't reconcile with prior statements she's given. As it relates to the glass, you remember from the trial, there was glass found on the bumper that there was an expert opinion that it didn't match the glass on the debris field around him. Now we have this additional piece of glass that's being introduced by the defendant herself. And I watched the documentary. I was actually in a little portion of it. Her description of it was the glass was embedded deep in his nose, so much so that when she pulled it out, blood came gushing out. That just doesn't sound like a fight. That sounds like an impact event. And again, I think it's very problematic. I think it was an unforced error.
Kim, I want to get back to you. Being a nurse, this piece of glass being pulled out, this is the following morning. Obviously, at that point, he's no longer alive. What are your thoughts about the description of the blood coming out?
Yeah, Vinny, that for me does not make sense that it could have occurred at allegedly 12:32 a.m. that the Commonwealth is saying, because we have vasoconstriction in our bodies. And even if there was a small shard of glass that was removed, if Officer O'Keefe was in that lawn and, in those circumstances for over 6 hours, it should not have been actively bleeding unless it was much closer to the time he was found that morning.
Now, I want to take a look at testimony from Paul Gallagher from the Canton Police Department, who was one of the guys with the leaf blower, talking about finding a cocktail glass in the snow. So we know that this cocktail glass has been part of the case. Let's take a listen.
See, it removes the snow. I was removing the snow layer by layer. And right here, you can see it exposing the cocktail glass. You're going to see red spots appear as I remove it layer by layer. These pink spots start to turn to be dark red spots.
Okay, I want to take a look at some video of John O'Keefe leaving the bar with the glass in hand. And Kevin Lenahan, as we're watching this video, do we suspect that is the glass that is found? Like, how is that, all of that fit together? Whose glass is it? Where did it come from?
My best guess is that there's one glass, and I've reviewed this evidence very closely. Unfortunately, when it comes to matching glass pieces, so there were 5 pieces found on the bumper, there were 9 pieces found on the ground, and then there was the cocktail glass remnants. 6 of the pieces on the ground were matched to the cocktail glass, and 1 on the bumper was matched, and 2 were said to be consistent. Does that mean the other pieces didn't match? No, I don't think so, because it turns out that the only way to really match glass, or the only reliable way, is to just kind of put it together like a 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. So it's very, very difficult to find and to prove that a piece of glass belongs unless you find that physical match. So my guess is the other pieces also, they all came from the same cocktail glass, but we can't know that for sure.
So, Wayne Dennison, if we now have a piece of cocktail glass in the victim's nose, an expert's going to have to tell us how it could possibly get there, right?
Yeah, we're going to have an expert to talk about how it could possibly get there. And much like Nurse Whalen is talking about, we're going to have an expert that talks about what happens with respect to bleeding and vasodilation once someone is already deceased.
So Joseph, trying to put the pieces together, no pun intended here with the glass, but how does this play? How does this play? If there's a piece of glass in his nose, Karen Reed found it, okay, well, the question really is, how did it get there? And how can either side prove how it got there?
Well, the upshot of this, right, might be that Karen Reed simply is not reporting accurately what she saw and what she did. If you remember the testimony from Kerry Roberts, she testified that Karen essentially went chest to chest with John O'Keefe, and it was Kerry Roberts that wiped off John O'Keefe's face. Also, it raises a whole host of other problems. For example, Arca spent all that taxpayer money building that cannon under the theory that John O'Keefe might have thrown a glass at the car. That doesn't reconcile with glass being embedded in the nose of John O'Keefe. So it creates a lot of problems, and I don't think any of them are good for the defendant.
It makes me a little more confused. I'll be honest with you. I'm not clear on how this glass plays. Kim, from your perspective, whose glass was it? Where did it come from? And how does it end up there?
Yeah, I think that it possibly was the Karen's glass, right? Because we know Officer John O'Keefe was drinking Bud Light bottles. And when he left the bar at the Waterfall Bar and Grill, he had a glass in his hand. I would say, though, that even after Karen went chest to chest with him, she was the one providing mouth to mouth. So her being at the top would make sense for her to possibly move debris and or a piece of glass from his face.
All right. Our insiders are staying with us. We've got a lot more to get to, including what is the motive, the alleged motive going to be? Because there's some evidence that came in the first trial that's not coming in the second trial. We'll talk about that, plus coming up next hour. Tonight on Vinnie Politan investigates the mysterious disappearance of Sudiksha Konanki in the Dominican Republic. What are her parents now saying, and why haven't investigators found her yet? Tonight, we investigate.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates. Tonight, 9/8 Central, only on Court TV.
You feel that?
The NWSL is on ION.
It's game time. Showing off a little skill now. Kansas!
The new Saturday Night Out is on ION all season long. Find ION wherever you watch.
ION, it's on.
We do not intend to introduce evidence about the Aruba event.
Okay.
I reserve the right, if the defense opens the door, then we may proceed with it. But in our case in chief, we don't intend to introduce any evidence from the Aruba event.
Okay. There we go.
The Aruba event. This was the big blowout fight that prosecutors say Karen Reed and John O'Keefe had, which made its way into the motive, the bad blood between Karen Reed and John O'Keefe, the jealousy that fueled the motive for her to take the life of John O'Keefe, right? This is a murder case. This is a murder trial. That's part of the motive. Aruba, for those of you who don't remember, it involved the Sullivan sisters. Here's Marietta Sullivan testifying at the first trial about what happened in Aruba.
After Mr. O'Keefe said, "Calm down, that's Laura's little sister," I said, "Hi, nice to meet you." That's when Miss Reed's head snapped up, and she very loudly told me to go myself across the lobby. And I said, "Yeah, you too," and walked away. I went straight up to my older sister, Laura, who was out to dinner with the couple the night before. I went up to her and I looked at her and I said, "John O'Keefe's girlfriend?" And she looked at me and said, "Karen?" And I said, "Yeah, you guys like her?" She said, "Yeah, she's okay." And I said, "Well, she sucks." So my sister pulled me aside from everybody and asked if the night that I got into the altercation with Miss Reed in the lobby, if I was making out with Mr. O'Keefe.
How did you respond?
That I absolutely was not.
She's not going to testify. They're out. They're not going to talk about what happened in Aruba. Let's bring back in our insiders, attorneys Wayne Dennison, Joseph Krowski Jr., Karen Reed supporter Kim Whalen, and YouTuber Kevin Lenahan. Kevin, so if we're getting rid of Aruba, like, why would she do it? Why would she commit this murder? What's the motive?
Well, I understand why Aruba was there in the first trial. They're trying to establish a narrative, jealous, vindictive girlfriend with a temper issue, and the idea. And then they're on their way to 34 Fairview, and when John calls Jen for directions, Jen mentions an old girlfriend of Karen's. So the idea is with the narrative that's what triggered her rage. But I always thought it was a bad idea to go with this. Keep the narrative simple. Stick to what you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 jurors, not just overall, but even in the little pieces of evidence. So I don't think we know for sure whether Karen knew that she struck John. So we certainly don't know if she had any intention or any kind of a malicious motive. All we know is that her Lexus did strike John at 12:32 and roughly 10 seconds. That's what we know.
Joseph,
so I think it's good to keep it simple.
Yeah, Joseph, if that's the case, then why is this a murder trial?
Well, you know, Vinny, as a former trial attorney or a journalist now, right? You don't have to prove motive. And to be clear, the prosecution reserved on the Sullivan sisters. We need the Sullivan sisters, don't we? But they're going to be used as rebuttal. So if the defense opens the door and tries to suggest that this relationship was perfect and Karen Reed exhibited no signs of jealousy, then they've reserved the right to call the Sullivan sisters. But remember, keeping with that theme of gifting information to the prosecution, Karen Reed last night talked about the ride to 34 Fairview in knowing that, and in her own words, there were multiple women that John had prior relationships with that lived in that neighborhood. And so those observations were made only moments before leaving those vitriolic voicemail messages to John. So I think there's ample message, ample information that on that night, certainly something happened and there was a fairly argumentative confrontation between the two of them.
Let's take a listen to some testimony from some of the other witnesses talking about the potential for jealousy and other women in John O'Keefe's life.
As we got by different landmarks, she then started, screaming, asking if John could be at certain people's houses.
And whose houses was she asking if John could be at?
If she could be at Bella's house.
There have been some years in the past dating relationship between Mr. O'Keefe and Bella's mother, correct?
Yes.
What, if any, conversations would you have with Mr. O'Keefe in regard to any sort of relationships or dating or anything like that?
Well, he dated a lot of people.
She said something like, John really loved Amy, and in my eyes, Karen was just a babysitter with benefits.
Okay. Kim Whalen, do you see Karen Reed possessing homicidal jealousy?
Absolutely not. And I think that the Aruba incident shouldn't have come in first trial over a month, or a month before Officer O'Keefe's untimely death. This has just been a smear campaign and prior bad acts for Karen that does not equate. In some senses, Vinny, you would even say this exhibits, although she might have had a verbal altercation, they never had a physical altercation or anything even close to that in their entire relationship. So why that night?
Wayne Dennison, what are your thoughts here? Because it's a murder trial. You don't have to prove motive. Joseph Krowski reminded me. I knew that. But a jury's going to want to know why Karen Reed would take the life of this man who did an amazing thing in adopting his orphaned sister's children, was raising these children on his own, was the son of parents who had lost one child already. They're going to have to explain why she would do that, why she would take him out on purpose. And do you think the jealousy is something that the prosecution can ride here?
Well, I don't think they're going to ride this particular incident. As Ms. Whalen said, you're talking almost a month before. It's a prior bad act that's very attenuated. If you're asking a jury to conclude that she killed him because he kissed another woman, I think that goes a very long way toward not being particularly relevant evidence. The jealousy issue is going to come up. I do not think that Karen Reed's counsel are going to open the door to hearing from the Sullivan sisters again. They are now fully on notice that if they get too close to that line, they're going to have to deal with it.
Kevin Lenahan, let me ask you something. You know, Jennifer McCabe talking about the ride where Karen Reed is angry and thinks that when they go looking for John O'Keefe that he could be at these other people's homes. Why would she ask that if she knew all along that he was dead on the front lawn of the Alberts, right? I mean, to me, that, even though that is a prosecution witness giving prosecution testimony, it seems to bolster her state of mind of, I don't even know he's dead. I think he could be cheating on me right now.
Well, I think that call came before she dropped John off, before they got to the house. So I think, so you want to look too at what the actual evidence is of anger here, that they were in an argument, right? Because everybody's just kind of assuming, and I think most of us, that there was probably an argument there, but there's only two people who were in the car, and one of them's dead and one of them's not testifying. But in the entire time that she owned the Lexus, there were only 2 triggered events, and so this is in the vehicle data, where something unusual happened. There's been no accidents in the times that she owned the car, but she takes a 3-point turn on Cedar Crest Street, where she punches the gas enough that it triggers the creation of an event while she's doing this turn. And then 8 minutes and 4 seconds later, she puts it in reverse, this time going backwards 24 miles an hour for 60 or 70 feet at least. So that is kind of evidence of anger, that you're driving like that, and what triggered that. So the idea is that maybe Jen mentioning that on the call was what triggered the anger by Karen. And this is, going back to, she's easily triggered when she's been drinking like she was on the Aruba trip, but again, to me, it's not proven beyond a reasonable doubt, things like that. So I kind of focus more on the evidence.
Gotcha. Okay, everyone's staying where they are when we come back. Not a great day for the lawyers of Karen Reed, and Karen Reed had a private conversation with the judge with her lawyers. We'll tell you all about it when we come back.
I find that there have been repeated misrepresentations made to the court by defense counsel, and I conclude that they were deliberate concerning the relationship with the ARCA witnesses. They were made at sidebar, in open court, and in pleadings. And I think the record is pretty clear, and I find that on July 25th, 2024, payment was made to the ARCA witnesses. Yet on February 26, 2025, in a pleading written by Ms. Little, signed by all 3 defense counsel, says the Commonwealth's motion to exclude these exculpatory expert witnesses, ARCA witnesses, who were not hired or paid for by the defense, is not made in good faith and is a desperate and transparent attempt to keep exculpatory testimony of neutral expert witnesses from reaching the jury in this case. So I find or conclude that that was a material misrepresentation and that it was deliberate. So I find that there is a flagrant violation of the Rule 14 obligations, and before I decide which sanctions are appropriate, I need to see defense counsel and Ms. Reed at sidebar.
That's a serious moment, a very, very serious moment inside the courtroom. So the judge calls Karen Reed and the attorneys to a sidebar to discuss what are we going to do about these serious ethical violations by the defense team. So let's go back into court where Judge Canone tells the public what the results of all of this is.
There's no greater constitutional right than the defendant's right to a fair trial, including a fair and impartial jury, the right to present a defense and confront witnesses, and the right to counsel, which includes counsel of her choice. So I've just had a thorough colloquy with Ms. Reed. I believe it was extensive and thorough, and she has expressed to me a strong desire to continue with her lawyers. Ms. Giannetti, is Mr. Jackson lead counsel? I just want to make the record clear. Mr. Jackson, are you lead counsel?
We don't define our roles in such a manner, Your Honor.
Okay, so because Mr. Yannetti is not pro hoc vice counsel, and Mr. Yannetti can try this case if need be by himself. All right. But Ms. Reed does have a strong desire to keep all of her lawyers, notwithstanding the Rule 14 violation and the apparent lack of candor, the findings and rulings I've made. So, based on that, I am not going to revoke pro hoc vice licenses. I don't expect to have to address this again. Candor with the court is essential. It's the bedrock obligation of all lawyers who appear in this court and all courts in Massachusetts. A lawyer is only as good as his or her word, and I need to be able to take counsel at their word. So I'm not going to tolerate false statements, any stretching of the truth, no misleading distortions. There's no place for that in the courtroom. And Mr. Jackson, you stated this very eloquently in your closing argument last time. So, Commonwealth, I am denying your motion to exclude the ARCA witnesses. Those witnesses can testify as long as counsel complies with their reciprocal discovery obligations. I will allow a full cross-examination, Mr. Brennan, and I will review any proposed curative instructions, limiting instructions, or final jury instructions. So that's my ruling on that.
Joseph Krowski Jr., what just happened? It's a big nothing, right?
So,
like nothing happened.
Well, it's not a big nothing because certainly there's a problematic record for the attorneys now based on the payment that was made last year. It doesn't reconcile with the pleading filed this year. This judge conducted a colloquy with the defendant at sidebar just to make sure that this defendant probably was required to waive any appellate issues related to that finding, because those attorneys certainly are going to operate a little bit under that cloud of suspicion that was just elucidated by her findings. I wouldn't say it's nothing. I don't want to comment. I give them the benefit of the doubt. I hope there is an honest and innocent explanation. I don't think any of them have had any discipline problems before. I know David Yannetti, I know he doesn't. I hope that they come up with an explanation. They might have to answer to a different administrative agency. And as it relates to the instructions, I think when you say nothing happened, I think that she's going to entertain allowing the government to really, really go hard after ARCA, and ARCA's being complicit in hiding their relationship with the defense team during the first trial and leading up to this trial.
Wayne Dennison, are you surprised that there's really no impact on the defense team here in terms of who's going to try the case?
No, when we talked about this during the 5-hour hearing, my prediction was that the lawyers would get to go forward irrespective of whatever they did. And they have an obligation of a vigorous defense here, but a vigorous defense really does require you to walk a fine line with a judge. And this is a judge who's now said that they have deliberately and flagrantly violated their obligations to her. They're going to be seen with a very, very different perspective. And I agree with Joe that the ARCA witnesses are going to be subject to very vigorous cross-examination, and the judge is likely to let them do quite a lot in terms of impugning the credibility of the ARCA witnesses. But they took the wrong path on this from day one. They should have fallen on the sword and said, to the extent that we had misled the judge, we apologize and it will never happen again. Instead, we had a 5-hour hearing.
Well, what's interesting to me is like we've all lived, like the lawyers and everyone has lived that first trial. This new jury starts fresh. They know nothing about the first trial. I mean, and to me, the first trial, in a certain sense, is almost irrelevant to the second trial. I've seen second trials where both sides have made completely different arguments. And it just, you know, it worked out that way based upon the way the evidence came in. I'm wondering, Kim, what's the reaction of the Karen Reed supporters to Judge Cannoni and her ruling here and the way she's ruled in this case?
Thank you, Vinnie. I think it's just been quite difficult to see things coming from Judge Cannoni that when you look at this objectively, in my opinion, you would say that the Commonwealth has made quite a few material misrepresentations in court over the last several weeks. So it's not coming across as a fair and impartial ruling, in my opinion, and I think that the Commonwealth has a couple of things to answer for as well.
So, Kevin, and we're talking about the ARCA witnesses, the experts who were hired by the feds. Their original opinions were their original opinions before the defense ever hired them. I mean, it's not going to change. That fact can't change, can it?
Well, the defense is going to make the argument that the report by the ARCA guys came out in February of last year before they had any communication with the defense, and that their conclusions were made before that, so that their report is independent because they were hired by a thought to be independent agency, the U.S. Attorney's Office. However, in a powerful document that came out a couple of days ago, a motion by the prosecution, which really accuses the U.S. Attorney's Office under the previous administration in that office of a murky relationship with the defense. And he goes on to quite a length about it and says, we have a good faith reason for believing this. And I think the judge understands this, and she's also suspicious of it. And I think that what Hank Brennan's been doing here has been playing chess, where he's planning 5 moves ahead. And what he's doing is, he knew that ARCA was never going to be excluded. He knew that his goal was not to get Karen's lawyers dismissed. His goal was to get Judge Cannoni to continue to say, you're not allowed to mention the federal investigation to the jurors. And I believe she might add, and they want her to add, you're not allowed to, the defense will not be allowed to call ARCA independent, because they're not. They came from the U.S. Attorney's Office, which for some reason had a bias.
All right, great job. Wayne Dennison, Joseph Krauske Jr., Kim Whalen, and Kevin Lenahan, thank you so much. When we come back, I'll reveal something else you need to know tonight, plus coming up next hour. Tonight on Vinnie Politan Investigates, Sudiksha Konanki disappeared while in the company of a young man she met on spring break in Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic. Does his story make sense? Tonight, we investigate.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates, coming up next, only on Court TV.
Doomsday Cult mom is now lawyer Lori.
She's representing herself
on charges of conspiring to murder her 4th husband.
She said, I can murder you now.
The Cult Mom Conspiracy Trial. Live coverage coming soon, only on Court TV.
Welcome back. Something else you need to know. Let's take a look at the big board. Back in court, Lori Daybell. You didn't think I wasn't going to show you the highlights of Lori Daybell representing herself today. Let's take a look.
Is the state proposing that there is no video, or that they don't have to give it to me because it's not attached to that DR number?
I think what she said was she's not aware of what video you referenced. So as far as her knowledge, she doesn't have it and doesn't know about it.
So I should go directly to Gilbert Police Department to get it?
Well, last time you were in court, you said your investigator or someone told you about it.
A mitigator.
A mitigator.
Showed it to me.
If they have that link, why don't they just send it to the state, and that may help the state determine if that's something they've already disclosed?
I will tell you why they won't, because that is my former team, and they will not do anything to help my investigator, my paralegal. They won't give us any information that they found. They won't talk to us at all because apparently there was a conflict. So they will not help us. They will not send us anything. They will not email us anything. They will not answer anything that we ask them to. So that has been the response from my former defense team. Your Honor, my understanding is that the state has interviewed every single person on my witness list previously. That's where I got the people from the interviews that they had from the state previously. So I understand that they're allowed to do another interview of them, but they have interviews of every single person that is on my list, with the exception of one.
Which is who?
Which is Nate Eaton. I'm sure that my investigator would like to have all of those things done, and I realize that we're on a time constraint, and I would be only concerned with one item, which is at Chandler Police Department, which was Charles, my husband's phone. Charles Vallow's phone. And I would like a copy of the extraction that they took from it. The digital forensic extraction from Chandler Police could be given to him immediately. That would be very helpful.
Wasn't that already disclosed?
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm happy to make an order, but again, if he's not done with that information you want, are you still wanting to proceed to trial at the end of this month?
Yes, Your Honor.
Even if he got something done, it could still be precluded, but I'll give him the opportunity to do whatever it is that you think he needs to do to analyze that. But that information's been in defense possession for months, if not over a year.
More than a year, Your Honor.
And he was just approved by OPDS last week, Your Honor.
I thought you said he was approved. You applied in January.
I applied for him in January, and last Friday, he got approved.
Again, this is one of those things where you have to weigh your options on whether it's worth it to get a continuance so you can have your defense do the work that you want done on your defense. But if you're telling me you don't want to do that.
I would like to do that, but my situation in my housing department precludes me from doing that.
From asking for a continuance?
No, from getting things done in an effective and quick manner.
Okay. All right, well, so you're telling me you don't want a continuance because any information he has at this point could be precluded as being untimely.
I understand that is the rule, and I understand how unfair and prejudicial that would be to me.
I presume the defendant will likely testify, so I don't know if we wanted to address that now.
Are you prepared to address that now?
No.
I generally will, I guess I'll advise the defendant now that if you choose to testify, it's likely that the jury would hear about the convictions. But at your request, they could be sanitized, meaning that they would only hear about the fact that you have convictions as opposed to what the nature of the conviction are. But that would be up to you whether you want that information out or not. And then the jury would receive a limiting instruction that the existence of those convictions is only to be used for the purposes of determining credibility. So you should be aware of that when you make a decision on whether you want to testify or not.
You know, Lori Daybell's starting to gather some confidence inside that courtroom. So much different from the first day of self-representation. This trial is scheduled for March 31st. So when you got Karen Reed taking place in Boston on the East Coast and out west in Arizona, you have Lori Daybell. It's going to be a busy spring right here on your front row seat to justice. Okay, folks, you know what time it is. We need your help in finding a child who is missing. This is Benjamin Lopes Rydell. Take a close look at his picture. He's only 15 years old. He is missing from Prescott, Arizona. Benjamin has not been seen since March 12th. This is what you need to do. Take a look. If you see him, make a call, make a difference. Pick up the phone. You can call 911. You can call 1-800-THE-LOST. Or you can call the Prescott Police Department in Arizona. We've got that number up on the screen for you right now. Let's see if we can get Benjamin to a safe place tonight. Don't go anywhere. We have another hour of live true crime. Vinnie Politan Investigates is next. In the meantime, please don't forget to hug the kids.